This is the second part of Japanese expansion. So we've got three essential questions this time. First, what are the origins of Japanese nationalism and militarism, but then also how does militarism kind of inform Japanese nationalism? You're going to remember that from World War I. And how do international events contribute to the growth of nationalism and militarism? So think back to the Great Depressing Lecture. How does that kind of interplay into all of this? And what causes the deteriorating relationship between Japan and the West? At what point was kind of that tipping point that there was no going back? So from our previous lecture on Japanese expansion, we discussed the opening of Japan to the rest of the world. This was a decision that was made by the Japanese government itself and stands to be very different from what China experienced, as it was not necessarily done to them, but instead it was an act of policy or kind of a just strategic decision making. During the Meiji Restoration, Japan westernized its dress and its military and many government bodies in order to be seen as a developed nation and therefore quality trade partner and foreign policy partner to the Western countries. However, this growth of industry and capital also increased the need for resources, which encouraged that swift turn to colonization of China. Now, remember back, Japan won the Russo-Japanese War, which gave it control over Korea, and later the First Sino-Japanese War, which gave it control over more of Manchuria. Following World War I, Japan expected to be seen as an equal partner in the negotiation process because Japan had alliances with the UK and therefore France and, ironically, and pretty uncomfortably, Russia. That was a friendship really just of convenience and not at all trust. We all have that friend that we tolerate just to get along with our other better friends. So as a part of this hot mess known as the League of Nations, each country was to agree not to fight in wars or build up their military, except in naval capacity, which was to be limited through a series of naval conferences known as the Washington Treaty System. Essentially, the four-power treaty said that participating countries, the UK, US, Japan, and France, are going to agree not to change boundaries or declare new landowners in the Pacific. So therefore, they're all agreeing upon the World War I boundaries of colonialism. Mandates. Yeah, mandates to protect fledgling resources that you take for yourself. The Nine-Power Treaty agreed that China was a sovereign nation, and Wilson was so proud. Hirohito was less proud. Finally, the Five-Power Treaty fully limited the size of armies to the World War I two-power standard, and the UK would remain the bad daddy navy of the seas. The US could be equal to the UK, while Japan could be half, and Italy and France didn't really need any boats for their mandates. This is ironic because Britain helped build up the Japanese Navy, adopting German military tactics during the Meiji Restoration. But following World War I, Japan was forced to greatly reduce the naval capacity in its Five-Power Pact. The treaties show that Japan is committed to international cooperation in the 1920s, but it's temporary because they keep getting the short end of the stick. Emperor Taisho gave the prime minister position to a favored political party, and 1925, all adult males were given the right to vote. Under Taisho, Prime Minister Hara brought Japan into the League of Nations, again desperately hoping for equal treatment on a global scale by the Europeans. Ironically, while democracy is starting to spread, Japan is also starting to crack down on freedom of speech because of the development of a communist party. How much political freedom is safe to be allowed when the commies are popping out of every crack in the road? Mix this with distrust of all the changes of government, and you have a rapidly deteriorating soup of citizens. So how does the Meiji Restoration predict the fascist rise of Hirohito? Think for a second. What actually is fascism? It's a hyper-nationalism, a targeting of scapegoats for our current state of affairs, and a dear leader who rises up with a cult of personality who promises to take back what is rightfully theirs. Peasants often rise up in support of this super-nationalistic cult of personality, and they take to the streets. Meiji undid an entire millennium of history, and only in just a matter of years. This creates a power vacuum, especially as the Japanese repeatedly were not seen as equals to the Europeans in all of their international negotiations. Hirohito takes the stage as the emperor and blames the financial crisis directly on the West and the Chinese populations. They have what we should. Let's rise up and declare everything that is rightfully Japanese. Now, this honestly isn't that big of a stretch if you actually think about it. People are starving, and they're struggling because of the post-World War debts and financial crises. People are hungry, and when they're hungry, they're more willing to do rash things and not necessarily think straight. So compare that back with our Great Depressing Lecture again, and combine it with the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act that the U.S. created in 1930 to further their state of protectionism under the genius Herbert Hoover, and you do have the makings of political backstabbing. Hoover responds, "I don't give a damn." All right, we're going to get back to all this stuff when we cover the Chinese Civil War and the rise of Mao, but for now, we're just going to do a real quick, brief overview. As Japan and other countries are ransacking China, it destroys the entire government structure throughout the countryside. China and Korea are under a constant state of war for over 50 years. Now we're talking full-on reign of terror, when there isn't a strong government in place and other countries are raping, stealing, and pillaging. The strong Chinese leaders look like a gang state. They further the corruption and chaos throughout China. So in 1927, the Chinese nationalist military and communist military, they all band together to get rid of the Chinese warlords that have been taking advantage of this situation. If they kill off the warlords, then they could turn their attention to the Japanese military. Japan knows that this chaos is happening and is kind of inevitable at this point. They capitalize on this chaos within China due to the Chinese Civil War. So on September 18, 1931, the Japanese explode their own section of a railroad that transports goods all over Manchuria. Now, naturally, they blame it on the Chinese so that they can enforce military control over the entire region. Hey, see, you guys can't even keep your own railroads working, and who knows if we can trust China when these people are blowing up our own capital for the sake of delusional communist uprisings. You've left us no choice but to violently take over this entire region to protect you. Now, once the world figures out what's really happening, the League of Nations is faced with a decision. Japan clearly violated the Four-Power Treaty, agreeing not to change control of various lands in the Pacific and not to colonize new areas. So what does the League actually do about it? What can they do about it? Well, they don't have any military, and they honestly have no real decision-making council. They have no expressly written policies expressing what they can change over time. It honestly sounds like the Article of Confederation from the United States' first government model. A dog with no bark, no bite, and it isn't even cute. It's like one of those scraggly, hairy, tiny, annoying dogs. I'm sorry. I just love him so much. Look at his little, like, puffball. His little tongue just, like, makes him better. I'm good. I'm good. All right. So, China. China begs that ugly dog league for help, and again, it's worthless. It's a worthless but ridiculously cute dog. It just stares at them blankly at China. Now remember, China is not seen as an equal, nor was Japan, and in all honesty, the other nations don't want to risk control over their mandates by doing something about it. After repeated bad press and a lot of international pressure, think yappy, annoying dog with a ridiculously cute tongue, Japan leaves the League. That's it. I don't want you to tell me what to do anymore, so I'm moving out, Mom and Dad. This starts the Second Sino-Japanese War, as Japan now has full reign to do whatever it wants to China. I just want to look at that dog a little longer. Wow, got it more. Okay, then there's this one thing called the Kellogg Brand Pact, which we mentioned in previous lectures. Yes, think about the cornflakes. That one, Kellogg's cornflakes. All League of Nations members, they agree not to fight a war with aggression. We fight wars with words, my friends. If members are angry, they must talk it out. If attacked, you do not fight back. Which leads to this cartoon. What images and words do you see? And what do you think they mean? What's the subject? And how do you know? Okay, so back up just a few steps. Let's get back to those naval treaties from before. When the size of the Japanese Navy was limited due to the Five Power Pact, the Japanese military split into two camps. First, there was the Kodaha, who were extremely militaristic. They saw the USSR as their biggest threat to their fascist expansion and potential preservation of the Japanese population due to need for resources. On the other hand, there was the Toshiha, who wanted to do things diplomatically, but they were concerned about the unrest in China, especially with the Chinese Civil War raging. They were trying to get rid of the warlords, etc. As these two military groups are fighting, the prime minister is assassinated. 11 naval officers killed the prime minister in an effort to take control of the government in a coup. It ended up with really nothing, as they all surrender and ultimately nothing changes, but it showed the weakness within the political system and the reactions to Western policy and policymakers. That's the May 15th incident. All right, so the Dark Valley. In the end, the Toshiha faction won. Think enemy is China, not USSR, and therefore it is no surprise that the general orders an invasion of China. Hirohito was against this action. It can be argued that at this point he was more of a puppet being strung along by his military and not the other way around. He was a failed fascist. We actually can't really call Hirohito a fascist. When we talk about fascism, it's just going to be Italy and Germany because he's not calling the shots. So during that invasion of China, multiple fights break out. One of the most horrific was the rape of Nanking. During the Sino-Japanese War, Nanking, the capital of China at the time, falls to Japanese forces, and Chinese government flees to Hankow, further inland along the Yangtze River. To break the spirit of the Chinese resistance, Japanese General Matsui Iwan orders the city of Nanking to be destroyed, just decimated to the ground. Much of the city's burned. Japanese troops launched a campaign of atrocities against civilians, in which later becomes known the Rape of Nanking. The Japanese butchered an estimated 150,000 male war prisoners, massacred an additional 50,000 male citizens, and raped at least 20,000 women and girls of all ages, many of whom were mutilated and/or killed in the process. Now, China would not surrender, which split Japanese forces throughout China. As one area was captured, they would have to return or recapture another city. As an important side note, shortly after the end of World War II, Matsui was found guilty of war crimes by the International Military Tribunal for the Far East and was executed for those war crimes. However, if you look through current Japanese history today, many textbooks deny the event ever took place. We're not doing that. All right, so pause the video here and just take a second. I want you to OPCVL this. We got to get our primary source OPCVL down for paper 1. So what's the subject of this picture? I wouldn't call it a cartoon. And how do you know? This can be stuff that's super obvious. Make sure that you're looking at the difference between the light and the dark, different images, different symbols or words or letters. And so as long as you can put your finger right on it and be able to point to it in the picture and then explain a conclusion of what larger it means. So it's okay if it's obvious sometimes. And make sure that you discuss perspective. Whose perspective is this referring to? After Japan left the League of Nations, Italy and Germany learned that that was actually a thing. Hey, you don't want to be a part of this party? You don't have to. If you don't want people telling you what you don't want to do, don't be a part of their club and start your own, my friends. This established what we call the three-power or tripartite pact, which flat out stated Germany and Italy get all of Europe. Cute little Italy. And Japan would get all of Asia. They would sign a pact of neutrality with the USSR so as to avoid a two-front war. Remember a little bit of the Schlieffen Plan early on. And at this point, Stalin is too busy killing off his entire population during his purges, so he's too busy to really be much of a threat at this point. Obviously, Japan has no desire to really listen to the neutrality piece with the USSR unless it's beneficial to them. But in the meantime, they move into Southeast Asia. Now, again, that mangy, tiny little dog of the League of Nations is at a hard point. They have this Kellogg-Briand Pact. They literally have signed an agreement that says that they cannot respond. So instead, In all of their protectionist might, the United States and Britain decide to stop trading with Japan and start aiding China in their war against Japan. Just remember the name Chiang Kai-shek, and we'll meet him later. So much relevance. By 1942, the Japanese military, under the command of the Japanese generals, not Hirohito, have taken all of that. The embargo on all Japanese goods kills the Japanese economy, especially the oil embargo. It is hard to have a plan of world domination if you don't have fuel to fund it and get your people places. So in an effort to end the US and UK embargoes, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. And remember, that oil embargo was a direct reflection of the rape of Nanking. Just pause for a second. Is anyone else seeing this as a deadly fight over a sandbox? Like small children? Seriously. Japan wants more land. The US says, that's bad, Japan. We don't kill our friends. And Japan says, forget you. I'm going to make new friends and find a new sandbox. Hi, Hitler. Hi, Mussolini. Let's start our own boys club where we're allowed to murder each other freely. The US and UK try and take the high road, but they put Japan in timeout through an oil embargo. So Japan blows up their sandbox and wonders why the United States joins the war with bigger bombs. Okay, so let's recap for a second. Mukden Incident. League does nothing. Breaking of the naval treaties. League does nothing. Japan leaves the League. League does nothing. League asks nicely if Japan can use its indoor voice and stop taking China's land and resources. Japan takes more. So the League stops trading with Japan. But seriously, what could the League have actually done? Remember, the entire world is fighting a global economic crisis. The Great Depression has people a bit distracted, as really they have no resources to do much of anything at this point, especially World War I is not that far out the door. Any action would have ignited an instant war. A war that they don't have the resources or money to be able to fight yet. People are starving. They're literally eating grass and their pets to be able to survive. The lack of action from the League emboldens Japan, Italy, and Germany as they see the demonstrative level of distraction. Take a few minutes and answer these essential questions thoughtfully in your notebooks. Could you argue that Japan was a fascist state? Why or why not? We'll compare Japan to Italy and Germany soon. This is just kind of the entry point of peacekeeping, or lack thereof.